Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Middleware Technologies. Today we will be looking at Oauth 2.0 Client Credentials Workflow. So here in this article, we will try to understand about the Oauth 2.0 Client Credentials Workflow, which is used in communication between two API services or servers without user interaction. So this is basically the high level that we are going to cover in this video, wherein we will try to understand what is client credentials workflow and in which scenario we can use this client credentials workflow with an example. And we will try to understand the high level architecture of that scenario and go through a step-by-step example on how the request flow happens in a in that example that in that scenario that we have uh, projected in the high level architecture. And then we will try to understand about the key features of client credentials workflow and some other use cases wherein this can be used. So now let us try to understand what is client credentials workflow. So if you have worked on Oauth, if you have worked on the Oauth 2.0 protocol, you'll know there are some important workflows on based on which the Oauth authentication and authorization works. In that, we have the first and the foremost important one is authorization grant flow, which is widely used in web applications. And there is another one that is client credentials workflow, which is the one that we are going to look at in this video. So the client credentials flow in Oauth 2.0 is designed for machine-to-machine communication wherein no user is involved. So this workflow is basically used when we want an application or an API service to communicate with another API service without any user intervention. So this flow is commonly used when a server application needs to authenticate itself and access resources on another server or service. So this is what the client credentials workflow is all about. So this is a workflow which is widely used when two services or two servers with some services running on that wants to communicate with each other without having any users intervention in that authentication or authorization flow. So let us try to understand how this client credentials workflow can be used using a scenario that is payment gateway integration. So let's consider a scenario in which you are building an e-commerce platform. So let's say we have an e-commerce application and your server needs to interact with a third-party payment gateway API or service such as Stripe or PayPal to process your payments. So let's say you have an e-commerce site that you have built and it takes the orders, and finally in order to purchase that order, you need to do a payment. So when you try to do a payment, it tries to go to an external site or a third party payment gateway site which accepts the the user's credit card details or debit card details and try to complete the payment and get a response from the payment gateway. So this is what the third party payment gateway is all about. So it is something external to your service or the e-commerce site which accepts the payment details and tries to process that payment. And this interaction does not involve a user logging in. It's purely server to server communication. So this is what basically uh, is the scenario that we are trying to cover and see how we can leverage the Oauth 2.0 client credentials in order to complete this seamlessly. So let us try to see the high level architecture. So this is your e-commerce application and this is your payment gateway service. So on a high level, what happens is, so whatever application you build, that is the e-commerce application, you register it with the payment gateway service. And this payment gateway service or the payment gateway server is going to provide that e-commerce third-party application with the client ID and client secret. So this client ID and client secret is going to be used by this e-commerce application, and it is going to send a request for access token with the grant type as client credentials. So this is where the e-commerce application is going to use the client ID and client secret, and it is going to send a request to the payment gateway's authorization service in order to gain a token or access token. And once it has the access token, so the access token is issued by the authorization server, uh, and the e-commerce application then does a request to payment gateway service using that access token. So this is where the authentication or authorization is no longer needed. It uses that access token as a asset or identity of the user in order to access the services on the payment gateway side. So once we have the response from the payment gateway service with the access token that we have sent in this fourth step, we handle the request response, and this is done by the e-commerce application. So this is what the high level architecture is, wherein we can leverage the client credentials workflow in order to access a third-party API service and process its response. So let us try to understand it with a step-by-step example, wherein the first step is registering the client application. So this is where the e-commerce application registers itself with the payment gateway service authorization server or OAuth server. So during the registration, the payment gateway provides the e-commerce application or the client application with the client ID and client secret. So client ID is a public identifier for your e-commerce platform, and client secret, it is a private key that your server uses to authenticate itself. So this is going to be a very important uh, uh, details that a client has from the authorization server or from the payment gateways service. So this needs to be stored securely on the client side. So once we have these details, the next step is request an access token. So when your server or e-commerce application needs to call the payment gateway's API, it sends a post request to the payment gateway's token API with the following data. So basically, so once you have the client ID and client secret, the e-commerce application will try to send a request to the payment gateway's authorization server with that client ID and client secret in order to gain access to an access token. Okay, so in that post request, so the post request that is going to be sent by the e-commerce application has some important fields. These are the required or the important fields that are transferred as a part of the post request. So the grant type is going to be the client credentials, and we are going to send the client ID and client secret that we have received in our step 1, and then we are going to send the scope. Basically, this is very important in Oauth 2.0. So whenever you are trying to access a third party service, you need to send the scope of the access that you are requesting for. So this is basically trying to tell the authorizations service that I want to access only this payment gateway service with right permissions. So that is what the scope is all about. So this permission the permissions your server is requesting for. That is what the scope is all about. Now, if you see the example request, so this is the payment gateway service authorization service endpoint, which generates the access token or provides the access token. So we are trying to send a post request to this OAuth slash token endpoint with the content type as application slash www form URL encoded, wherein we are trying to send the grant type, client ID, client secret, and scope with the data. So this, as soon as this request is sent, the next step what happens is the authorization server issues an access token. So it verifies that data that we have sent. The payment gateway validates the client ID, client secret, and the requested scope. So whatever this data we have sent, it tries to verify it, and if it is valid, it is going to respond with the access token, and this is going to be the response that we are going to get. So basically, OAuth response for access token is going to contain the access token, the token type, and when it expires, and the scope of that token. And there are other cases wherein the access token also contains the refresh token and the ID token, but these are different cases which we are not going to deal. This is going to be specifically like we are looking for client credentials, so we will restrict ourselves to the following data. Okay, so basically we will get an access token, and it will tell this is the bearer type of the token is bearer. So you can use this token as a part of the request that we are sending from client to the server. So the authorization header should contain this bearer token, and it contains the expires in field. Basically it tells when the access token is going to expire. So once we have this access token, the next step is we use the access token to access the resources. So your server or the e-commerce application uses the access token to make authorized API request to the payment gateway. So this is where the e-commerce application now tries to access the payment gateway service with the access token that it has received. So it will send a post request to the payment gateway endpoint with the authorization header consisting of that access token. So this is where like we need to send the access token that basically acts as a credentials to access the payment gateway service. And we are sending the content type as applications as slash JSON, wherein we are sending this JSON to the payment gateway service. So here like we will set the amount, the currency in which the amount is going to be detected, and the payment method with the other details like the client, the end user's card details, and we process that order. So once the payment gateway server validates the access token and processes the request, it sends a response that we handle in the fifth step. The payment gateway responds with the request of the API, that is the confirmation of the payment processing. So this is a response that it is going to accept or handle, wherein it shows whether the payment has been successful or not, and if it is successful, what is its transaction ID and what is the amount that has been deducted and in which currency. So once we have this, the e-commerce application is going to handle that one, and it is going to send a notification to its end user or the end user who is trying to use that application. So now let us try to understand the key features of a client credentials workflow. So here like there is no user involvement. So this flow is used exclusively for server to server communication, so no user authentication is involved. The next one is access token usage. The access token is used to authorize the API request. So here, like, we are not passing any client credentials like user ID and password, but it is purely getting authorized with the access token. And the third one is secure storage of secrets. The client secret must be securely stored with the client or your server and never exposed in public repositories or client-side code. So this is very important. The client ID and client secret that we receive, and especially the client secret, is the one that needs to be securely stored on the client side or the e-commerce application side, so that it is not compromised. And the fourth one is short-lived tokens. So the access token that we receive as a part of authorization has a short lifespan, reducing the risk of misuse. So basically, so if you receive an access token, it let's say it expires in 300 seconds, it is something that reduces your risk of misuse. So let's say if your access token has been decrypted, or it has been captured via the network, uh, even though it has been at captured in between, uh, it cannot be used if it is already expired. So that is what the expiry time helps in. Now let us try to understand the common use cases of client credentials workflow. So as we have seen, it can be used in the payment gateway service, wherein server-to-server API calls to process payments. And it can also be used in data sync, wherein we have one API service where we have to we have syncing data between we are syncing data between two backend systems, basically using this client credentials workflow. And we can also use it in job monitoring, wherein a server polling or pushing updates to a monitoring system can utilize this flow. And the other one is cloud services, wherein we can access the cloud resources and APIs using the client credentials workflow as a scenario. So this flow is widely used in the backend integration, where secure and automated communication between the servers is required. So this is very important. So if you want to use the client credentials workflow, the backend services that are trying to use that client credentials workflow needs to communicate in a secured manner and in an encrypted manner. Otherwise, your client secret is going to be exposed, and you won't be your request will be compromised. So this is what I wanted to show you in this video. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. Thank you all. Thanks for watching this video, and you guys have a great day.